All right, welcome to third edition of the 240p Club podcast. All right, we perfected some of our bugs from the last few goes at it. I'm going to introduce everyone right now. Sitting across from me this time.
Hi, it's Nikki. I'm not sick anymore, so now my voice sounds a little bit better.
Go, Nikki.
And 10 times more annoying.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to put up with you the entire podcast.
See, the best thing is you are sitting across from me, so if you were sitting next to me, I would have every chance to slap you across the face, but...
Yeah, so the entire podcast will be...
Nobody wants that!
That sounds horrible now that I think about it.
That's why I said no one wants to hear that unless it's a different kind
Alright,
of podcast.
for those without a dirty mind, I was just simulating Nikki smacking me a couple times, sort of like Beavis and Butthead, like do.
You know, honestly, even that sounds bad.
Okay, that still sounds bad. Never mind. I'm done with you.
So am I.
We also are sitting right next to me this time.
Hi, I'm Ray, aka Lord Cuddy. What's up?
You have nothing to add? Like, what have you been doing the past few weeks, man?
Well, I've come down with a cough.
I did not spread it to you, I swear.
Yeah, you didn't. This is like something mysterious and new.
Alright, also, to our third edition podcast, we have a guest. He's going to be filling in tonight. He's going to be our fourth panelist. I want to see everyone say hi to, what's your name?
I have a name?
What's your name?
My name is Kyle.
Don't say Snoop Doggy Dog.
Ah, damn it.
Yeah, Kyle. Kyle, what did you do in the broadcast field? 'Cause I know you used to work on like a show.
I did a heavy metal radio show back in community college for, I'd say, a good 3 years or so.
Awesome.
Called it the Heavy Metal Power Hour. And my motto was, it's an hour so powerful, it takes two to contain it.
Nice.
Just played nothing but the greatest heavy metal hits known to man.
Nice. Well, your expertise is not in heavy metal tonight. It's going to be in classic gaming.
Oh, man.
All right. Well, we're going to, excuse me. I drank the beer wrong. I'm okay. What we're going to be covering tonight is we are going to be covering the NES Classic. See, Nintendo recently announced that they were going to... I got the news feed right up here. Nintendo just announced at the... was it the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, or...
It was one of them.
You know, one of the shows. Honestly, I don't have the press release in front of me. But they announced that they were going to release the NES Mini, which is a brand new peripheral you could hook up to directly to your TV with an HDMI cable, and it has 30 NES games preloaded on it. It's not an emulator either, actually. It's an actual... It runs the games just like you would be hooking up a regular Nintendo. Only it's going to be with an HDMI cable, and the peripheral is... It plugs into... It could plug into a Wii U, like the regular classic controller. They're going to be selling it for $59.99 and $9.99 for a second controller, which is worth it. I'm going to be reading from the computer screen here of all the games they released for this. Included will be Balloon Fight, Bubble Bobble, Castlevania, Castlevania 2, Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., Double Dragon 2 The Revenge, Dr. Mario, Excite Bike, Final Fantasy, the very first Final Fantasy, nice, Galaga, Ghosts and Goblins, Gradius, Ice Climber, Kid Icarus, Kirby's Adventure, Mario Brothers, Mega Man 2, Metroid, Ninja Gaiden, Pac-Man, Punch-Out, not the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, but the one with Mr. Dream, which is basically the same game, Star Tropics, Super C, which is basically Contra 2, Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3, Tecmo Bowl, The Legend of Zelda, and Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link. Pretty impressive list. That's 30 games they have there. Here's the thing, though, we were discussing, they don't have anything to change the cartridge. They don't have a cartridge slot, period. It's basically just a miniature-looking NES. You hook up with an HDMI cable, you hook a controller to it. It's not due till November, so we haven't seen, like, the specifics of it right now.
I don't even think pre-orders are up yet. I know, like, they have pre-orders out in Japan, which is already sold out. I believe Australia and Europe is already sold out as well. But it's looking like it's going to be a holiday release.
Probably.
As with most Nintendo or any video game stuff.
Probably, yeah. Most of them come out around like November, just so kids can put it on the Christmas list.
Yeah, around September or November is usually like the last month that they'll put stuff out before the holiday season.
Yeah, it's actually, I think this might be more of a toy for adults too, because a lot of adults grew up with these games. So this will be like something that most adults will have. They sold their NES to get, another system like a PlayStation back in the day, and they're mad because, that's gone forever. And they want to start playing these games again. I mean, there's emulators, but this is supposed to be like general and quality.
Dose of nostalgia.
Now,
Yeah.
of course, this isn't the first time something like this has been released. About a decade ago, Atari had a line of systems called the Flashback, which was a self-contained unit. It had a lot of Atari 2600 games that were made by Atari. I'm not sure if there were any third-party titles that were included in that set, though.
Was there a cartridge slot with that?
There was no cartridge slot. It was all the games were built in.
Yeah, I did see something like that. It looked like a miniature Atari, and it came with like a miniature Atari controller. Mm-hmm. I've also seen like a version. I think it's an emulator, though. I think it's like an officially licensed emulator, where it's just the Atari controller that plugs into the TV through like, I believe, an HDMI
that came
cable.
out a few years ago.
Yeah.
Because I do remember when I used to work at GameStop, we did end up selling one.
Yeah, those things look cool. I'm not sure how they perform because I have no experience. I know when this news broke, they're saying Genesis is going to fire back doing the same thing. However, I've seen this peripheral in stores last year, around the holiday time. It was basically a miniature Genesis. It's licensed out from Sega, and they put like a lot of bloatware on it, like a lot of homebrew titles that supposedly aren't really very good. In addition to like some of the Sonic games and some of the top Sega games. Difference is it ran actual Sega cartridges, I believe. The thing is, though, that system was a emulator, and all the games that were built in, they ran like you were running on an emulator. So you're better off like you could actually just hook up your PC and you'll get basically the same performance,
Yep.
So, I mean, like the Nintendo one's authentic, and it's coming from Nintendo, and it's including some third-party games. The thing we were thinking about, though, is what games were missing from this system.
Burger time.
Nikki automatically chimed in. She demands the NES version of Burger Time be.
I'm not even good at the game anyway. It's just, it's making cheeseburgers.
And they have Pac-Man, so it's like it's not like they're completely ignoring third-party like arcade games this time around.
Yeah, you have Pac-Man, you have Mega Man 2. I mean, Capcom signed on for it. Castlevania, Konami signed on.
Funny because
One that's
I'm sorry, I was going to say
no, you can finish.
When's the last time Capcom actually cared about Mega Man? Like the last time they actually put Mega Man in, talking more of a modern game now. Street Fighter Cross Tekken, I believe Mega Man was a character in it, but it was like the bad box art, so he was like really slow and really clunky, and people were pissed. So Nintendo fired back by putting Mega Man, like the Mega Man we all know and love, in Super Smash Brothers. So.
And one that stuck out to me that I thought could definitely be added, that could have been added to the list, although it would need it may or may not need like an extra special controller. I thought Duck Hunt could have gone there.
I'm not sure how they're going to market that. Like, that would be a cool idea to include, like, a miniature zapper. But I know, like, in 2016, the backlash against guns and gun peripherals and everything would make that a little more difficult.
There's also no separate port for that either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, all you had to do is plug it in, like the old school zapper, you plug it in, you just include something with a 10-foot cord,
Yeah, because the ports that they actually have, from what I've read, are, if you guys know, like, how a Wii controller is shaped, it's like the little, little rectangular, really thin rectangular, but it's like a little thing on the bottom of it.
Ray, do you remember how the original zapper worked?
Well, basically what it did, it was a light gun. You pointed it at a TV screen, and when you fired it, the screen would go black, and certain parts that were able to be hit would flash white. And if you were pointed at something that was flashing white, like, you would hit it, and you would get the desired effect from doing so.
The thing with the light gun, though, is with modern TVs, like a flat screen, from what I'm told, I don't think it'll work like that way. So obviously Nintendo would have to update it. However, it's, as shown with the Wii, this wouldn't be too difficult.
No, Nintendo definitely has enough technology to where they can...
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So this is one glaring omission. Another one that I thought was omitted unfairly, Tetris. I'm talking about the NES, the Nintendo version of Tetris, not the Tengen version that was a collector's item for years. The Nintendo version was phenomenal. It was like, it defined a game. It defined, puzzle games. It didn't have a storyline. It's just, this is a puzzle game. Nintendo marketed it, and it turned into one of their biggest hits ever. Actually, the Game Boy version was an even bigger hit than the NES version. It's just this glaring omission, I thought. And I'm not sure if it has to do with licensing or anything. I'd probably have to research that more. Or maybe, someone from Nintendo's actually listening. They can clarify that for me. But that was a glaring omission. Also, the other thing with the system that I'm not a big fan of is the fact that it doesn't have a port to add on games. I know this allows a lot of abuse. People could just go online, download it to a SD card or something, plug it into the Nintendo, and bam, you have 500 free games on there, which just people are doing nowadays anyway. But at the same time, it's we're not trying to, promote that. We're trying to we want people to buy these games legally because they were great 30 years ago. They're great now.
It kind of also defeats the purpose if they can add more games into it. It's more so they're paying for not only the system itself, the mini system, but they're also paying for the games in itself.
I would like that option, though. I would like to have the option, because they already have that on the Wii and the Wii U. You can download Nintendo's Classic Library.
Right.
That's Nintendo's biggest strength right now. That's their Classic Library, So, we'll see, hopefully if there's enough demand for it, Nintendo will release something where you can download some of these games. Also, there's an option, if down the line, let's just say, someone hacks it, they can figure this out as well.
And there are people good enough to actually do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You'll hear about it with
absolutely.
For me, I thought the inclusion of Super C instead of the first Contra was interesting, because Super C is kind of popular in its own right, but Contra, I believe, was the more popular of the two, the one that more people played.
Everyone knows the 30 Lives code.
Right.
That people don't know that wasn't originally from Contra. That was just it was called the Konami code because most Konami games had a variation of that code in their game. So, the 30 Lives code actually got most popular through Contra. Contra, the Nintendo game, was actually way more popular than Contra the arcade game. It was one of the early NES smash hits. 87, was a nice year for software, NES software. That was one of the smash hits. And it's crazy they're including Super C, but not Contra. I don't know what kind of licensing that is.
I wonder if it's, I don't know when exactly Kojima came into Konami, but I wonder if that has anything to do with it.
Anyway, Ray, what other glaring omission because I know you've been itching all week to talk about this one, man.
Yeah, this might be a little bit of a controversial opinion. I might be biased because this is my favorite series, but the game I really think they should have included in this NES Classic thing is Earthbound Beginnings. Now, this is actually the first game in the series that over in Japan is called Mother, and we only got the second game when it was actually current. It was Mother 2 for the Super NES, and it came over here and they called it Earthbound. And what a lot of people know is they actually did completely translate Mother 1, and we're planning to release it in the United States again as Earthbound, but it got the rug pulled out from under it at the last minute.
Here's I could talk about Terranigma. I think the same thing happened, didn't it? It got translated and it was supposed to finally be released here. But that's way ahead of the time. towards the end of the SNES life. Like when that game came out, the PlayStation was already out. So,
and this was near the end of
They
the
probably could
NES
have just
life
waited
too.
and put that on the PlayStation instead.
yeah, I don't think they wanted to redesign it. I think they already had it like designed, and
Yeah.
it came out for Australia and I believe Japan, obviously Japan, and it was an official English translation.
And the game is beautiful looking in itself.
The game is absolutely beautiful, but that's a
I still
topic
never
for.
finished it.
Yeah, so going back to Earthbound, the NES game Mother 1 actually finally did see an official release in the United States last year on the Wii U, and they decided to title it Earthbound Beginnings. Now, Earthbound, the Super NES game, had been neglected in the US for like a long time after its release. Like, they didn't market it very well. And NES was included in Smash Brothers for the longest time, but until the Wii U came along, Earthbound really didn't see any re-releases in the
That's
US
the same.
until the Wii U came out, and when it did, it like sold like hotcakes. Like almost everyone who has a Wii U has Earthbound, and I think the same thing happened with Earthbound Beginnings. Now, I know it's like 25 years after like it would have been considered a classic, but I feel like if they had put Earthbound Beginnings on the NES Classic, it also would have sold like hotcakes, especially for people who didn't have a Wii U. So
Absolutely. I don't think it would have been considered classic by the casual gamer because a lot of people's introductions to the Earthbound series was the Wii U title. And, I'm talking about people that are like in their 30s that played through the NES era, The thing is, with something like that, though, you are right. Like, if that appeared on the system, it would sell like hotcakes. And Nintendo put Star Tropics on there, which was kind of obscure, but not that obscure.
Yeah.
It wasn't considered like an all-time classic, but it was a fantastic game.
one of my favorite NES games.
Yeah, I've never actually played through the whole thing yet. That was one of those games that was always on the back burner. Also, Final Fantasy. I mean, the original Final Fantasy didn't really ignite too much sparks on the NES, but it's more popular now because of all its sequels.
Well,
like everyone went to play the original.
Right.
Maybe possibly little known fact, but they actually did start to localize Final Fantasy II for the Famicom and bring it over here as Final Fantasy II. But again, that had the rug pulled out from under it because the Super NES was coming out. And Final Fantasy IV was the latest game at the time, so they just made that one too instead.
I believe it also has something to do with the upcoming release of Final Fantasy 15. People say, okay, well, Final Fantasy 15 is coming out, so maybe you want to backtrack and you want to find out what exactly Final Fantasy is actually about. The only issue with that is every single Final Fantasy is a different story.
That's the thing.
Except 13. But we don't discuss 13 here. We don't talk about 13.
I can talk about 13.
He can
I'm
talk
not
about
talking
13.
about 13.
We're not talking about the cosplay, dress up, idol.
I'm convinced that's the only reason that game exists, but that's neither here nor there.
Right. We're just not going to discuss.
Back 13 sequels to Final Fantasy the original. Like, again, I think that was included because of the success of some of the other Final Fantasy games, but that's a classic in its own right. It's just people that never played it are going to be so frustrated once they, realize they have to grind, maybe 7 or 8 levels before they can do anything,
Well, that's pretty much what I did with the, I'm going to be going a couple of years forward now. If anyone is a fan of Sailor Moon, there is an RPG out that came out for the SNES. It was never officially translated. It was only emulated and fake translated through that and placed through Season 3, the Death Busters season. But if we're talking about grinding, my characters are at, level 8 before I actually started to do anything in the game.
Yeah, Final Fantasy had to be at least level 5 before you even attempted the first temple. And the battle system, too. Here's the thing, the Final Fantasy had, auto-aim pass. I think it was 3 they started putting that in. Mm-hmm. Where, you take a swipe at a character, you take a swipe at an enemy, I should say, the enemy's already dead, it'll say missed. The character will still try to take a swipe at it anyway. It was a different strategy. I mean, I guess it was a bug. They couldn't figure that out in the programming, but it remained in Part 2 as well. But enough Final Fantasy talk. We could spend an hour talking about Final Fantasy.
And Chrono Trigger.
And Chrono Trigger.
We'll wait until 15 comes out and then maybe...
Yeah, we'll do a Final Fantasy retrospective eventually. Another glaring omission to keep on topic. They put Mega Man 2 in there, which I'm so happy about. However, Mega Man 2 is probably voted one of the fan favorite, I think. Especially Wily Castle 1's music. I think that's iconic at this point.
A lot of people played Mega Man 2 before they played the first one.
That is very true. I'm included in that. I haven't even heard of the original Mega Man. I've seen Mega Man 2 and I don't know if anyone remembers these, but you would go home from school after maybe once a month, maybe once every other month. The book club would send you these flyers. They would hand them out in class. You would go home, and tell your parents what kind of books you wanted. It came with a planner too, some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle stationery, Barbie stationery, etc., whatever you wanted. One of the things was Consumer's Digest, I believe it was, published these really crappy Nintendo strategy guides. And they were crappy, but it was cool at the same time because, again, we didn't have the internet back then, so you flip through them and you see some games you've never heard of they have strategies for. And it's Mega Man 2 is one of them. And that's how I wound up playing Mega Man 2, because my cousin wound up getting it, and I played it over there. I loved it so much. But honestly, the first one I got, and the one that still I hold dear the most out of all the Mega Mans, is Mega Man 3. That was the first one I ever got, and the first one I played through ridiculously.
Personally, I think that's the hardest one of the classic NES series.
I don't know, 4 was pretty hard, too.
4 was pretty easy, actually.
You thought 4? I thought 4 was the hardest. 4 is actually the last one I beat. But, 3 was just ridiculous because you had to fight all the Mega Man 2 bosses again. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, it was definitely a challenge. Those levels were tough.
Yeah, I think the part you're talking about with the refights from Mega Man 2 is probably the most brutal part of any Mega Man game.
That was definitely up there. The other thing we wanted to discuss was someone in their attic found a working... Well, I use working loosely because hardware-wise it worked, but
the disc didn't work.
They found a 64 DD in their attic, a prototype of the US version of the Nintendo 64 disc drive.
Now, of course, the 64 DD, or disc drive, was promoted by Nintendo, back when they were still calling it the Ultra 64, way before it was released. And they were planning this add-on from the very beginning.
I remember hearing about that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, it did eventually see release in Japan, but not until 2000, and it flopped miserably. Only about 11 games were made for it, and a lot of them were, game development tools. A lot of them included Mario, and they were for making art or something.
Oh God!
I don't know.
Yeah, the disc drive flopped in Japan. It never seen a U.S. release. Around this time too, Nintendo was kind of trailing Sony and even Sega in a way, because the Saturn was still relevant at the time. So, they were third place because they waited so long to release the 64. It was still cartridge-based, so, they didn't get as many third-party developers as Sony did or Sega did. It crashed, basically, but they still had every intention of releasing this thing to the U.S. public, but they wound up scrapping it when the, this Japan version failed.
I think some of it had to do with when the Virtual Boy came out, how much of a colossal failure that was.
Yeah,
and
but
it
that
kind of left a bitter taste in people's mouth.
I also believe a lot of third-party game developers abandoned the N64 and went to the PlayStation when they found out they could get
Squaresoft.
Get more advanced games and FMVs off of that.
Yeah, that was the big hype back then. You could put FMVs, so much storage space on CD, and the main thing, it was so much cheaper to develop. A disc was so cheap. whereas a cartridge was expensive to develop. And
I think people were just tired of blowing on cartridges at this point.
Yeah, but you ever try to put a scratch disc into a PlayStation? It's not pretty.
Oh, I've done it. It's not pretty.
It's not pretty.
No. And especially because I have like really long nails, and sometimes when I do get fingerprints on my discs, I have to like try to clean it, and I have to like position my fingers in a certain way, like under my shirt, wipe the disc. But I have to position my fingers in a certain way to make sure that I don't add any more scratches.
Well, we're getting off topic just a little bit, but yeah, they found a disc drive in an attic somewhere. It was confirmed by a Nintendo engineer that it was a working prototype, the US version. It wasn't just an adapted Japanese version. This had every intention of being released here. They actually had a blue disc with it. Like if you see the image, we have it on our Facebook. Cheap plug to facebook.com/240pclub. They have a image of it on the article, and you see the blue disc, and this had every intention of coming out here. The unfortunate thing is Nintendo scrapped it in favor of, I believe at the time, like they were maybe a year away from the GameCube.
That's correct.
So it's probably why they scrapped it. They learned a lesson. Sega did the same thing years earlier with the 32X. They had the Saturn out on the market. They listed 32X to try to get some more out of that system. 32X wound up being a fairly useless prefeel. So that went the way of the dinosaur. So the disk drive, unfortunately, it would have been cool to see them develop some software for this. The thing is, though, with that, it reminds you last year of someone who found a working Nintendo PlayStation prototype in their attic.
Wow.
In case you don't know the story, Nintendo, we discussed this in podcast 1. Nintendo was trying to compete with the Sega CD, released their own CD-ROM prefeel, and because in 1993 they were getting crushed still by Sega. Sega overtook the market in 91, kept the market in 92, and then 93 they still had control basically of the 16-bit market. Nintendo wanted to fight back. Sega just released Sega CD, so they approached Sony, who they've worked with on titles in the past, about designing a CD-ROM prefeel for the Nintendo. They wanted to make it a little different from Sega. Sega had a couple of recycled games on theirs to start off with. Sewer Shark and Night Trap were actually the first titles for a Sega CD, and they were made for a system called Nemo back in 1986.
Which ran off VHS, I believe.
Yeah, they just converted it to CD-ROM, all the motion video and everything. They're supposed to be released. We'll talk about the Nemo and other systems that never made it in a future podcast. But, flat out, Nintendo wanted to compete. They contacted Sony. Now, they got to the developmental phase to the point where they had a working prototype of the system, which, as evidenced by the person that found it in their attic, it looked like a Super Nintendo controller with basically the PlayStation logo on it. It was pretty impressive.
And some games were already being planned for it. Like Secret of Mana, I believe, was originally supposed to be for this Nintendo PlayStation, and they had to downgrade it when... Well, you can keep explaining.
Oh, yeah. Well, basically, Nintendo at a CES show approached Panasonic with the same deal because
it was Philips.
Philips, I'm sorry. No, they never did approach Panasonic.
They never approached Panasonic, I believe. It was Philips. Next.
And Philips was in a intense rivalry with Sony at that moment.
Yeah, so Philips was trying to get their working prototype. I think they were a little farther in development than the Sony was. Mm-hmm. So, Nintendo made a deal with Philips, thinking, and Sony, of course, had all this technology. They spent a year developing at this point, and they were furious with Nintendo. There was, lawsuits. The outcome of it was Philips got to design a couple Zelda games and a Mario game for their system called the CDI, because Nintendo basically did the same thing. They backed out of the Philips deal as well. So they got to develop 2 horrible Zelda games and a horrible Mario game for a CDI system.
And then another horrible Zelda game.
Oh, there were 3 Zelda games, yeah.
But I can tell you there is at least one silver lining about these horrible Zelda games. You could see the king for the first time in the entire series, unless you watched the cartoon, and had a playable Zelda.
Well, technically, no. The king you did see in the, if you let it go for a while in Link to the Past, did see the king. He was dead.
Yes.
But you did see him. He was dead at the time. You just see a skull on the throne, you know.
Yes.
That was the king. Actually, if you beat the game, you do see the king.
You do see him in the end credits, yes.
You do see him in the end. Sorry if I spoiled that for anyone. But go on.
It featured a playable Zelda, and this will be the last time that Zelda would be playable until 2015 with Hyrule Warriors. So, if you're a fan of Zelda, which she has become more of a stronger, independent princess as she had not been before.
As modern times demanded a female hero.
Yes, and also because Zelda is completely badass, and which actually started with Ocarina of Time, where she did what she did. I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't played it yet. It was re-released for the 3DS, so if you haven't played it yet,
or buy
the cartridge if you can find it. It's fairly rare, and I believe it still goes for $50 to GameStop. So,
Ooh.
Yeah, I think it's still up there.
So yeah, long story short, the CDI was on its own system from Philips. I've seen infomercials for it. They didn't really have a strong marketing base. That flopped. You had 3 Zelda games and a Mario game on there. Sony decided, you know what, we're going to enter the market, and released the PlayStation on its own in the US in 1995, and quickly became the top-selling system. Nintendo, meanwhile, decided they weren't going to spend any more resources on the CD market. They were going to stick to cartridges for the next few years, and, 94 was actually one of the best years for Nintendo games, like the SNES. Some of the most treasured classics came out on that system in 94. We'll go into that again later at a different podcast. But, this is cool. They found a working Nintendo Sony hybrid in their attics. And the thing with the system was they took it apart. Apparently it was way more Sony parts than it was Nintendo. And I believe they actually developed a homebrew game for it.
I believe it's called Super Boss Gaiden or something. I can't believe that this came out like less than a year after the system was found. That's pretty amazing.
As once you have the specs, I'm sure, it's just a matter of designing it. I think it was like a 2D, like two-speed CD-ROM, so it's basically like designing almost for a 486 PC.
Yeah, that game takes about a half hour to finish, judging by the YouTube video if you're playing it blind. It's about the boss of Sony finding out that this technology got leaked and goes on a rampage and destroys Sony HQ.
I haven't seen the gameplay, but according to some of the screenshots, it kind of looks like a River City Ransom type game.
Yeah, something like that.
All right. Yeah, that was interesting how they found the disk drive in an attic a year after they found the Nintendo version of the Sony PlayStation in an attic somewhere across the world. You gotta wonder if anyone has prototype of, let's say, the Nemo somewhere hidden away.
Possibly a prototype of the Dreamcast. I think I would be interested in seeing.
That would be cool. Thanks for listening to us today. If you want more information on the 240p Club, you want to go to our website, 240pclub.com. Also, we have facebook.com/240p Club, and we're also on twitch.tv under 240p Club.